In this video, I'm going to be upgrading my disc brake rotors. Hey, what's going on, guys? You might be wondering why my S2 is all torn up upside down behind me, and that is because I've taken both tires off to upgrade my disc brake rotors from the stock 180 millimeter rotors to these 203 millimeter rotors, and I want to walk you through how I did it. Now, this is actually my second attempt of making this video, because when I started to remove the stock brake rotors a few nights ago, I completely stripped some screws. It was probably the most frustrated I have ever been with my Super 73 S2, and it wasn't even the bike's fault. It was completely my fault. So if you're gonna do this, make sure that you use the right tools, that you're patient, and everything's gonna work out. I wore down a couple screwdriver heads. No. Oh, I'm screwed. I went as far as trying to grind some grooves into the heads of the bolts so I could use a different screwdriver to get them out. I finally had to resort to going over to my father-in-law's house, who has every tool imaginable, and he had to extract the final two bolts. Some of you might have seen that on my Instagram story, some of the struggles that I went through getting the stock rotors off. But good news, they're off. I'm still gonna walk you through it. All I'm gonna say is it's a lot easier if you're patient and have the right tools. So let's go over those right now. So the bolts that bolt the rotor onto the hub of your tire are Torx bolts. So make sure you get a T25 Torx bit to easily get in there and remove these bolts. Now, they're not gonna come out very easy, because you might be able to see it has some blue Loctite on it there, but again, with a little patience and the right tool, you'll be able to get it right out. Now, if you're looking for a video on how to remove the front or rear tire, I actually have a couple of those videos already on this channel. I'll be sure to link those. But the front tire is super easy to get off. The rear tire, a little bit more complicated, because you have to deal with the chain. Plus, it has these dropout plates that you just, remove the bolts from and yank it out. So I'm not gonna worry about that in this video. Also, when I'm doing this rotor change, I will be swapping out the brakes pads with these Tektro brake pads. It's probably a good idea to use new brake pads on a new rotor. That way you can get them bedded properly. I'm also not going to go over adding new brake pads to your calipers, because I have a video about that as well. So all of that will be linked so that you have those resources if you want to learn how to do one or the other. This video is just going to be about replacing the stock rotors with upgraded rotors. Now let's talk a little bit about the rotors that I picked up. I got these off of customebike.com. It's a great site to mod out your Super 73. I decided to go with bigger rotors because it's going to help with braking. Where I'm on the heavier side, I like to ride fast, then bigger rotors are going to be ideal for me. What a bigger rotor does is help out with heat dissipation, so you're not going to get warping. It's going to help out with brake noise in the future and just give you an overall better stopping experience. Now, on the front rotor, I'm going to be using this 203 millimeter fixed wave rotor here. So basically the rotor is connected to the frame of the rotor. On the rear one, however, I'm going to be using a floating rotor. So there's actually these little pins that hold the disc off of the frame of the rotor. And that's actually better for heat dissipation, where all the heat kind of stays in the rotor and it helps dissipate that heat. And the reason why I did that for the rear is because that's where most of your braking is going to take place, on your rear tire. I don't know about you, but as I'm braking, I squeeze the rear brake and then kind of pump the front brake if I need to slow down quicker. So that's why I decided to go with the two different types of rotors, even though they're the same size. And this one is a little bit cheaper, so it was a slight cost savings. Now, because these new rotors are bigger than the stock rotor, you're going to need a spacer on the front and the back of the bike, and it's going to hold your brake calipers in a slightly different position than they currently are. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but the ones that I picked up are the SB001 Galfer spacers. That's the same brand as the rotors themselves. So let's get into removing the rotors and then we'll get the tires installed on the bike. All right, so we're gonna start with the easy one first. This is the front tire. I've actually already loosened my bolts, and I'm gonna be putting some brand new bolts in here. Now, if you're really careful, you can use the same bolts that you extracted, but because I was a little careless and stripped several bolts, I will be replacing the bolts. So we'll talk about the replacement bolts in just a second. Yours most likely won't come out this easy because I've already broken the Loctite on here, but let's talk about swapping it out with the new rotor. All right, so when removing the rotor, you can handle it how you want if you don't plan on keeping it. However, with the new rotor, you want to be careful not to touch the metallic part that the brake pads are going to be touching, because as you can see, my hands are pretty dirty, and that's going to give you some brake noise. Now, if you do, it's not the end of the world. There are ways to clean your brake pads and your rotors. But what's nice is this Galfer company that makes these rotors actually sent a bag of brand new bolts with the Loctite already on them. So those screws those bolts that I messed up, don't even have to worry about them because I can easily get them replaced. We'll just line up the rotor. I'll put my first one in here. I'm not going to tighten it all the way, just going to use it to position. And if you are replacing these bolts, these are M5 10mm bolts. Okay, so we got the first one in. Going to line up the next one. And when you do it, you want to tighten them in a crisscross pattern. So I'm going to go to the opposite hole that I put my first one in and throw that one down. Also, before you get too far, make sure that the label side of the rotor is facing up, because that's going to give you the direction of travel that these rotors have. Plus there's a little arrow just in case to help you out. But if you have the blank side facing up, then you're going to have to take it off and do it again. Got those torqued on nice and tight. Front tire is done. Let's talk about the rear tire. Okay, so the rear tire is slightly more complicated as far as what you need to remove to get the rotor on. First of all, you're dealing with the wire to the motor. Then you also have these dropout plates. I've actually already removed this rotor off of the back because you've already seen the removal of a rotor. It's not much different than the front, but you have this massive nut here that you got to remove. Then you have this washer with a tooth in it. You can see that there. And that actually nestles down into this slot down here to help with torque. Then you remove your dropout plate, and if it doesn't come off that easy, then there's a bolt here that you also have to remove. So we're going to tighten that back around. And then another washer. I mean, you can leave that on if you would like to, but I'm just going to set it aside so I don't lose it. And then we're finally to the spot where we can put on our rotor. Now these nuts are difficult to remove. So what I had to do is actually remove the nut on the opposite side and use a crescent wrench to go against the flat side of this hub nut here, hold that in place while I then loosened this big bolt here. So that's a little pro tip for you. Come to the opposite side, hold this in place while you then remove that nut there. All right, let's get this rotor installed. Okay, so this is the rotor that I'm going to be putting on the rear tire. Again, it's this floating design. You can see how the frame here is not welded to the rest of the rotor. And again, that just helps with heat dissipation and is better for overall braking. And it looks slightly different than the rotor I threw on the front, but they are the same size. Label side up, and you just slide it over the wire there, get it into place, and then let's bolt it in. Again, we're going to alternate sides here, so I'll start with one to hold it in place, but we'll go opposite side. There's 6 bolts altogether. And if the wire's in the way, you can rotate it. And now our rotor is on. All right, so I already got my brake pads swapped out. Again, if you want to know how to do that, I have created a video on that I'll be sure to link. But now we're going to be adding the spacers to the forks of the bike. Okay, so this is the spacer. It comes with 2 bolts and some washers, and this is what's going to tie it into the fork of the bike, and then your existing bolts that come with the bike will go into those 2 holes there. Now on this, if you can see it, there's a little arrow that says up. Well, it's going to be pointing down because obviously we're doing it backwards, but this side does need to be up, but there's a nice little arrow to show you how to do it. So let's get this screwed in now. Make sure it's nice and secure. Okay, now let's fasten the calipers to the rotor. So I'm using the bolts that came stock with the Super 73. So I'm gonna tighten these up, but not all the way, because I want to make sure the calipers are centered on the new rotor. Okay, so it still has a little play. The tire should slide right into the slots there. Sounds like we do have a little bit of rubbing on the brake pads, but we'll deal with that when we get it all sorted out. Okay, so I am going to finish this brake video handheld. It's taken me about 2 weeks to make because I kept running into bumps in the road. So this is going to be a follow what I say, not what I do video. But let me just wrap this thing up with an overview of exactly what I did to upgrade my rotors from the stock 180 millimeter to the Galfer 203s. So I got my bike put back together. I changed the brake pads on my caliper. If you want to know how to do that, I do have a video showing how to. I've added the Galfer SB01 spacer to the front, and that gets the calipers off of the frame just enough to give you that braking power that you need. All right, and on the rear tire, this is where I ran into the most trouble because I could not quite figure out what spacer I needed to use. Let me show you what I bought. So initially for the rear, I bought the same spacer for the back as I did the front, the Galfer SB001. On the side it says it upgrades a 160 millimeter to a 203. And I thought that maybe the numbers on customebike.com were just a little off because it did work on my front tire, even though the rotor was 180. So this one works for the front, but not the back. Then I jumped on Amazon thinking I was smart and got a smaller size. Well, I ordered the exact same size, different brand from Amazon. I don't even remember what brand this was. So now I have an extra spacer here. So I jumped back on Custom e-bike and ordered the Galfer SB002, thinking that this higher post here and this lower post here would be what it took to get the right angle of the caliper on my Super 73. Well, guess what? I'd already tried this once, but I thought I'd try it again. And the spacer that comes with the S2 on your front forks is the one that actually works. So I bought all those for no other reason than to just look at and try, I guess. But if you're going to do this upgrade from the 180 millimeter rotor to the 203, then all you got to do is grab your spacer from the front and flip it so the tall post is towards the front of the bike and the lower post is towards the rear. I even use the same hardware that comes with the bike So this is the longer bolt if you've ever taken off your brakes in the front, and this is the shorter bolt there. Now I did add washers between between the spacers and the caliper on both ends. After riding this around and taking a look at my brake pads, we'll see what the wear does. Ideally, you need the brake pads to cover your rotor, which I'm pretty sure they're doing right now. But that is my tip, is to take the front spacer off of the front tire or the front caliper and put it on the rear with the higher peg or post towards the front. Now, if you have any questions about this install, hit me up in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them and read through. This is kind of a Mod Podge of several videos that I tried to make. I think it's gonna be great. I got the 203 millimeter rotor on the front and then the 203 millimeter rotor on the back. I already did take this on a quick test run. It feels great. It stops like it should. To see any major differences on braking power, I'm going to have to take it on a longer ride. I was really just betting the brakes. But yeah, that was my install. It shouldn't have been as hard as I made it, but whatever. I did it. I figured it out. If you're wondering, you can just jump to all the steps that I struggled through. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Hit that like button, comment your questions or comments down below. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day.